Don't be scared. Who thought Johny Hendricks won? All right. So, you saw the fight, and I understand there might be a little bias, but you saw the fight. What did you think?
I think it came down to the first round. You know, the first round is the only round that's very close. 3 and 5 go to George, 2 and 4 go to Johny. Round 1 is really tight. I believe George did more in round 1 to win, and I'll tell you why. I've been asked this question 100 times. We've debated this 100 times already. It comes down to, first and foremost, the takedowns. If you look at the takedown portion, you know, you can do it in any order. It's not a particular order. Look at the takedown portion. George takes down Johny Hendricks once. Johny Hendricks takes George down once. When George got the takedown, he attempted a guillotine. When George put on the guillotine, Johny Hendricks went to his back. Johny Hendricks went to his back because he's defending the guillotine. Anybody here who knows jiu-jitsu knows if the guillotine is not tight, you stay on top and you take your head out. If the guillotine is tight, you throw yourself on your back. So George had one attack and attempted to mount. So he tried to progress the position. When Johny Hendricks got the takedown, he didn't land one punch and he didn't try to progress his position. George simply got up. And if you look, I know it's splitting hairs, but when the round is that close, you got to look at what there is. George had one submission attempt on the ground, and he tried to progress his position by attempting mount. Johny Hendricks didn't attempt to strike or progress position. So when it comes to the takedowns, I think George had the edge. Standing, if you want to look standing, Johny Hendricks threw all his strikes from the clinch, body-to-body clinch, not Muay Thai clinch. So body to body, you can only generate the force behind your limb. You know, if you're punching me with your arm, there's no body weight behind it, really. George landed the majority of his strikes, 9 strikes, this is a fight metric, from a distance. So you can generate a lot more power, and he landed a head kick. So if you're going to compare strikes from the clinch to strikes from the outside, a freestanding position, you're rarely going to see somebody get knocked out from a body-to-body clinch, punch in the ribs or a knee to the leg. You know, you're never going to see that kind of knockout.
I'd like to debate with you, but I won't. Let's talk about the post-fight. So George gets out there, and for those that follow UFC Central, I've been saying it for a while, especially after the Carlos Condit fight. I believe George has 2 to 3 fights left in him. Since the Carlos Condit fight, we saw Nick Diaz, we saw Johny Hendricks. That to me, when this fight was signed, I said to myself, we could be seeing the last of Georges St-Pierre, depending on motivation. George fights Johny Hendricks, arguably the toughest fight of his career, gets on the microphone with Joe Rogan and announces that he needs some time off. Did you know that was coming?
You know, George talked to me about retirement during his training camp, but I really steered him the opposite way. I said, it's not the time to talk about this stuff. After your fight, you decide. Right now, let's just talk about Johny Hendricks and what you're going to do for this fight. I really cut him short a little bit because I really don't believe in thinking that way. You know, once you start thinking that way, you're completely distracted about what you're going to do with the rest of your life when Johny Hendricks is still not, it's not done yet. So we didn't get into an in-depth conversation, and after the fight I wasn't sure what he was going to do. Nobody knew, and I don't think George knew exactly what he was going to do.
I talked to George, did you see you were there at the post-fight press conference? So we saw what happened there. For those that don't know, it was, for a guy like myself, it was kind of emotional sitting there, watching, you know, the UFC president Dana White go off the way he did, because I was sitting at the back thinking, well, hold on a sec, Dana, have you talked to George? And you know, some of the, you can't say some people were kind of egging Dana on, but Dana gets very emotional, 100% understandable. That's how Dana White is. But I was sitting there, you got to talk to George first, talk to George, but not, he just got out of a 5-round fight. Not a good time to talk to any human being. So Georges St-Pierre, you know, and we were told George wasn't going to come to the press conference. So Dana went off and did his thing. He was obviously very upset with the judge's decision and stuff like that. I would say 15 minutes into the press conference, the door opens, Georges St-Pierre walks onto the stage, and I thought to myself, oh boy, this could get crazy. And Dana White, for those that don't know, Dana White's as honest as they come. You can rip him as much as you want. Dana White's a good guy. He speaks, he wears his emotion on his sleeve. George came out there, and George started getting lambasted by some of the media. You saw some of that. And then it quickly turned into a situation where George, to me, I was witnessing almost a meltdown in front of the world. Dana cut it off right away. Dana stopped it right away. He refused any other media from asking those specific questions because George was not in the right frame of mind to be answering those questions. When you see stuff like that, George up there, George just a constant professional coming out to address that kind of stuff, do you think to yourself, you got to get him off that stage, or just let George do what he wants to do?
It's a tough call, you know. I think George is a very honest guy. It was definitely an emotional time for him. It might have been his last fight. That's all he's been doing his entire life. I think George is a promoter's dream, and that's one reason why Dana went so hard on George and wanted to make sure George doesn't start any retirement talk. I really believe that, you know, I know for a fact that George is their biggest payday. You know, that's twice a year, and it's hard probably for them to say no, goodbye to that. But at the end of the day, George's health for me is number one. And if he feels that his health is in jeopardy, he should retire. And if he feels he wants to continue and he can do it, I'll back him up as well. I would have liked to see the same from Dana White, you know, because that night, Georges St-Pierre broke the record for most time at the octagon. So if Georges St-Pierre owes something to the UFC, everybody owes to the UFC.
And the other thing that caught me, well, I shouldn't say caught me by surprise, it kind of was like a realization was, after the press conference is done, for those that don't know, Dana will actually sit with all the media, and we do what's called a Dana Scrum. It's basically not necessarily related to the event that just occurred, but stuff that's upcoming or stories that are out there. That usually happens right away. After the press conference was done, Dana left the room and he went to go talk to George. He says, "I'll be right back, guys." 20 minutes later, Dana walks back into the room and you saw a completely different Dana White, and he realized maybe he shouldn't have said what he said, although he is sticking by his guns, you know, it's all good. But at the same time, he realized, listen, what Georges St-Pierre has to deal with may not be big to you or I, but it's big to George. He's going to have to deal with it on his own. I talked to George after the post-fight press conference. I talked to him, I believe it was Monday and Tuesday before I went on the air, just to get a sense of how he's doing. I didn't ask any other questions, and he said his spirits are up. I mean, some of the stuff he was sending me had put a smile on my face. That's George, that's just the way George is. But to me, it seems his spirits are up. What's the latest on George?
I've been talking to him a little bit every day, and every day he's feeling better. He's a happy guy, but there's a lot of stress in his life. You know, I don't want to get into personal topics. I think these things might come out later on in the media. You know, everybody has this kind of problems in their life, but it's hard to be world champion for so long, live this type of lifestyle for so long. He's 32 right now. He's not 22 anymore. When does he start living his life? When does he start a normal, balanced routine? Does he keep fighting till he's 40? He's got to stop sometime. He wanted to stop. He was thinking about stopping after Condit. Then Diaz called him out. Then he had to come back for Diaz.
That Diaz fight was
he had to do the Diaz fight. And then after Diaz, they said, if you leave, you're ducking Hendricks. Okay, he's got to do Hendricks. Now they're telling him he needs to do a rematch with Hendricks. And if he loses, he's got to do a rubber match. And if he wins that, then he's going to fight some guy who knocked out, you know, some new young gun who knocked out somebody that George can't duck, you know. So it never ends. It's been like this for 7-8 years, you know. And I think it's time for him to sit back and think about himself for a while, because I think he paid his dues. I don't think anybody can disagree that George paid his dues.
And I get asked all the time,